So we're going to take a look at the Mishnah now on Daf Nun Gimel. Hanoder min atmorim mutar b'tmar b'dvash tmorim. So according to the Tanakama that we're learning now, that which comes out of the tmorim, which is called dvash tmorim, and even though it has the name tmorim to it, nevertheless, his das was on the actual gufa tmorim, but not on the dvash that comes out of the tmorim. And similarly, we have a case in anovim, in grapes, where he took a neder from sitvonios, which are unripened grapes during the fall season, and normally you leave them on the vines until later on, until the summer, but he harvests them prematurely, and they use these sitvonios to extract a kind of a grape vinegar, mutar b'chometz sitvonios. Since he only mentioned the gufa pri, therefore his isur is limited to the gufa pri, and does not extend to include even that which is extracted from the pri, despite the fact that that which is extracted from the pri has the name of the pri itself. It's called the chometz of sitvonios, but he only prohibited upon himself sitvonios. That's the shita of the Tanakama. Now we're going to learn another two shitos on this same issue. We start with Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is the most machmir here, and he holds kol sheshem toldaso kruya olav, since that which is extracted from the pri also shares the name of the pri. Therefore, noder heimenu asur biyotze heimenu. When a person takes a neder from the pri, then he's not limited in the isur. The scope of the isur includes also that which is a tolda of the pri, because it has the name of the pri on it. So, for example, when he takes a neder enjoining himself from tmorim, it includes even dvash tmorim. And if he takes a neder enjoining himself with sitvonios, that includes even the chometz of the sitvonios. And then we have the chachamim shita, chachamim atirim. The chachamim are going to be the most mekil, and the Gemara is going to analyze the shita of the chachamim. So again, we should not identify the Tanakama and the chachamim. They're two different shitos. The Tanakama is going to have the middle of the road shita. So that's what the Gemara immediately analyzes here. What is the difference between the chachamim and the Tanakama? Tanakama, chacham hainu Tanakama, it would seem that they're identical, because the chacham matir the yotze min pri, even though it shares the same name as the pri, and the Tanakama likewise, and the chachamim likewise were matir. So we have the chacham at the beginning, at the end of the Mishnah, and the Tanakama at the beginning of the Mishnah, and they both seem to be saying the identical thing. They have the same position. And now the Gemara is going to come up with a possibility of a more extreme position lakula, and that's going to be based on Rav Shimon ben Elazar. Ika beinayu hadod Tanya. The difference between the Chacham at the end of the Mishnah and the Tanakam at the beginning of our Mishnah is with regard to the principle of Rav Shimon ben Elazar. Klal zeh Omer Rav Shimon ben Elazar. Rav Shimon ben Elazar formulated the following principle: Kol shedarko lechol. Any pri that you eat, in other words, eat the gufa pri, and not only that, but derech hayotzi menu lechol, you also eat that which you extract from the pri. Kigon, and a perfect example of that would be tmorim udvash tmorim. So we eat both the dates themselves and the so-called dvash that comes out of the dates. Is then, says Reb Shimon ben Elazar, Nadar bo asur Now here you have to add another word here, af biyotze mimenu. If you took a neder and you only mentioned the pri itself, then since you eat not only the pri, but we generally eat also that which is extracted from the pri, therefore the neder includes that broad scope of both the pri and that which you extracted from the pri. So therefore, Asur biyotze mimenu. In addition to being Asur in the pri itself, he's Asur in that which comes out of the pri. Hanoder meyotze mimenu. Now in the flip case, he took a neder on that which is extracted from the pri. Asur bo, he's prohibited not only in that which comes out of the pri, but also bo in the gufa pri. So generally speaking, we could summarize the first principle, the ratio of Reb Shimon Elazar. So whenever you eat, generally speaking, you eat both the pri and the yotzim in a pri, then the neder includes both the pri and the yotzim in a pri. Now we have the seifa. Kol she'ein darkol lechol. People don't eat the pri itself, but rather derech hayotzim menu lechol. They usually only eat that which is extracted from the pri. And the example of that is sitvanios. People don't eat the sitvanios. I guess they're very bitter because they haven't ripened yet on the vine. They're premature. And what do they eat? They eat the yotzim mimenu. They take the extract of the vinegar and they eat the vinegar. Then, and here's the surprise, Rav Shimon Elazar maintains that no derbo eina aser ela biyotzim mimenu. That even though he took a neder mentioning the pri itself, in this case the sitvanios, nevertheless he's not asur in the sitvanios. He's only asur in that which is generally eaten, which is the chometz that is extracted from the sitvanios. Because his kavanah was only for that which is extracted from the sitvanios, namely the chometz. So based on this principle of Reb Shimon Elazar, we can answer our question, what's the difference between the Tanakama at the beginning of our Mishnah and the Chacham at the end of our Mishnah? The Chachamim in the Seifa of the Mishnah accepted the Shita of Reb Shimon Elazar. And when it says, the Chachamim atirim, we're talking about a case of noder misitvanios. And as we said earlier, people don't eat the sitvanios, the gufa pri, because they're very bitter. They only extract the chometz from the sitvanios. That's what they eat. And therefore, you're allowed to eat the sitvanios themselves. The Tanakama didn't go that far. The Tanakama would say that if a person took a neder from sitvanios, then we can't go beyond the actual haflas peh, the literal formulation of his neder, and he prohibited upon himself the sitvanios. So now the Tanakama is going to allow you to eat the chometz of the sitvanios, whereas the Chachamim at the end of our Mishnah had the opposite extreme opinion. So again, let's just go over this. According to Chachamim, he'd be allowed to eat the guf hasitvanios, and he's only enjoined from eating the chometz. According to Tanakama, at the beginning of the Mishnah, he's also to eat the sitvanios, but he's mutter to eat the chometz sitvanios. And now we have the most machmir shita, and that's Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. He holds that a nodem sitvanios is also bein begufo shel pri in the sitvanios themselves, bein bechometz hayotze behen. So when it says at the end of the Mishnah Chacham matirim, that's mentioned because it's a separate shita. It's not to be identified with the shita of the Tanakama, because the Chachamim are saying that in the case of nodem sitvanios, he's allowed to eat the sitvanios. Again, he's not allowed to eat the chometz hayotze behen because people don't eat the sitvanios; they eat the chometz hayotze behen. But that's the flip side of the Tanakama sheet. The Tanakama says, well, he prohibited himself from sitvanios, and therefore he certainly is also in sitvanios. He's allowed to eat the chometz sitvanios because that has a different name or a different category. It's not the guf hapri. And the Chacham also disagree with Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, who says that not only is he also in the chometz, but he's also also in the sitvanios. So we have the three shitas in our Mishnah. Now we look at the second Mishnah on Daf Nun Gimel. Hanodim in a yayin, mutter b'yayin tapuchim. Now, the word yayin includes only that which is called yayin. Anything that has what's called a shem levai, meaning you have to add another, so to speak, adjectival title to it. You have to add yain tapuchim. That's not considered yain. That's yain tapuchim. It has a shem levai. It has an additional word in its name. Another example. He took a neder not to benefit from shemen, min hashemen, mutar v'shemen, shum shemen. No, shemen basically does not include shemen, shum shemen. You could derive shemen and extract it from many different substances. But all those substances have to be mentioned in the name of the shemen. It's a specific type of shemen, shemen, shum shemen. So you can get sesame oil. But he took a neder on shemen, and stam shemen is not shemen shum shemen. Shemen shum shemen, because it has a shem levai, is a separate category. Another example. He took a neder min advash. Dvash comes from bees. Mutar v'dvash tmorim. You can derive dvash from dates, and that's also called dvash, but it needs the shem levai of tmorim. Another example, min chometz. He took a neder not to eat chometz. Mutar v'chometz sitvanios. Again, you can derive chometz from these unripened grapes, but then you need that shem levai to describe them as chometz sitvanios. And he took a neder on chometz. Another example, min creation, which is some sort of a leek, a karti, mutar b'kaflotos. Kaflotos are a specific type of karti that grow in Eretz Yisrael. In the footnote here, he says they're very small. I'm sorry. The regular classic karishin are very small, and kaflotos are gigantic. Min hayerek, he took a neder not to benefit from a vegetable. Mutar b'yarkos hasoda. He's allowed to benefit from vegetables that grow out in the fields, because stam yerokos, when you use the word yerek, that refers to those vegetables that grow in a garden. But there's something called yerokos hasoda, and that requires a shem levai. Again, you have to add another name to it, and that's called yerek hasoda. So yerek includes only yerek that grow in a gina, in a garden, but not yerek hasoda that grow out in the fields. Now, in the note here, he quotes the Rosh. He says the following. Tam zeshu shem levai, this underlying principle that the neder does not include something that requires a shem levai, misparish al kol dinei Mishnah, refers to all the cases in the Mishnah. Now, this is not so simple. The Ran disagrees in the case of kaflotos. Kaflotos has nothing to do with Shem Levi, says Naran, but rather it's not included under the name Karishin. It's a separate genus, a separate status. Now, in addition to the Ran and the Rosh, which are the super commentaries on Masechet Nedarim, we also have the Mefarish. We don't know who he is, but anyway, the Mefarish says that the principle of Shem Levi applies in the case of Yerokos, namely that Yerokos HaSodeh, those vegetables that grow out in the fields, they have a Shem Levi, and therefore they're not included in the Neder of Yerek. But in all the other cases in the Mishnah, that extra category has its own name, and it's not included at all in the original name. For example, according to the Mefarish, Yayin comes from grapes, or Dvash comes from bees, and Shemen comes from the olive tree. And Chometz is a kind of a Yayin that was machmitz, and so forth and so on. The Gemara says the following: Tanya, we learned in a brayso, hanoder min hashemen. If a person takes a neder that he won't benefit from shemen, if he took this neder be'eretz Yisrael mutar b'shemen shum shemen, because in Eretz Yisrael they use olive oil and not sesame oil. So when he said, I am taking upon myself a neder not to benefit from shemen, he meant olive oil. Also b'shemen tzayis. However, b'Bavel, when they talk about shemen in Bavel, they don't refer to olive oil, but rather to sesame oil. Also b'shemen shum shemen. In Bavel, that's what they used. They used sesame oil. So stam shemen is shemen shum shemen, mutar b'shemen zayis. They didn't use olive oil in Bavel, and if he took a neder not to benefit from shemen, then he didn't mean shemen zayis, but rather he meant shemen shum shemen, the exact opposite of Eretz Yisrael. Makom shemestapkim zeh umizeh asu bazeh ubazeh. If you have a location where people use both oil that comes from zayis and oil that comes from shum shemen, then his neder includes both. The word shemen now includes both shemen zayis and shemen shum shemen, olive oil and sesame oil. So the Gemara asks Pshita, isn't this something that we could have known on our own without the brisa? What was the brisa coming to Mechadish? If we use both in those locales, both oil coming from olives as well as oil coming from sesame, then it's simple that the word shemen means both.
Right.
Right? You come into a store and you order shemen, so he says to you, okay, I mean, would you prefer shemen zayis? Would you prefer shemen shum shemen? Lo tzricha. What was the case that the brisa was addressing to be machadesh, that he's also in both shemen zayis and in shemen shum shemen? The ruba min chad mistapkin. It's a case where most people use one of those various oils. It's only the minority of the people that use the second category, the second sort of oil. So l'chora, at this point, I would say that azlin basar ruba, and that which is a miut is not included in his neder. Ma'odetema ezel basar ruba. He's only going to be also in that category of oil, which is generally used by the majority of the people. Okay, now we have to face this challenge. So why don't we rely on rope? Safek Yisur l'chumra. Now wait a second. Safek Yisur l'chumra has nothing to do with this Gemara at all, with this halacha, because Safek Yisur l'chumra means I know that there's Yisur here, but I'm not sure where it is. Is it this piece? Is it that piece? Is this to be identified as Isur, or maybe this is Heter, maybe it's Shuman,
right.
and it's not Chelev. But here we're talking about a whole different thing. We want to know what he had in mind. Either he had in mind the Rove, or he had in mind the Mute. And since we don't know what he had in mind, we have to assume he had in mind the Rove. So what are you going to tell me, Safek L'chumra? What do you mean Safek L'chumra? What kind of Safek L'chumra is it? So he writes here, since we don't know, perhaps when when he took the neder, his intention was for that which the minority of the people use for oil, therefore aserba. Now, this is a very difficult Mishnah because Gemara, I should say, but Pashas, we should ask him what he had in mind. No, we're not going to ask him what he had in mind. We're going to force upon him an Isur Neder on all types of Shemen, because the minority of the people also eat Shemen, and maybe you had in mind even that minority use of Shemen. So he writes here, Efshal Afarishes Kaven Hein Lamasha Rov Koren Shemen, Hein Lamasha Mud Koren Shemen is Machmirim. We're going to be Machmir for the possibility that he had in mind both categories of Shemen, the Rov use of Shemen and the Mud use of Shemen. Comes along the Beis Yosef in Yeridea Siman Reish Ches, and he says we're talking about a case where everyone uses both categories of Shemen.
Like equally?
No, not equally. Otherwise, there's no Rov.
Right.
Elisha Rov Hashtamshus, in most cases, they use X. And in minority cases, they use Y. But everybody uses both.
Right.
So you might say Holchim Achar Rov.
Right.
And it depends on how frequently they use one type of Shemen. No. Here the Mishnah establishes Safek Yisur L'chumra, but it's a different type of Safek Yisur L'chumra. The Safek Yisur L'chumra tells me that whatever is defined as Shemen, since he took a neder in the name of Shemen, is concluded as neder. And everybody uses both categories of Shemen. So I don't know exactly what the Beis Yosef would say if, let's say, 65% of the population uses Shemen X, the other 35% of the population uses Shemen Y, and it's exclusive. And we don't know which category it belongs to. Maybe we'd ask him, I don't know. But now, according to Beis Yosef, we're establishing an objective definition of his neder. We're not even going to ask him what he had in mind, because both categories of Shemen are called Shemen by everybody. Norvas, what was the Havamina? The Havamina was, okay, we don't usually use that type of Shemen. You run out of olive oil, so you use sesame oil, but okay. Now the Gemara says the following. Hanoder mina yerek. Okay. Now we're getting back to the sugya of Shemitah that we touched on earlier in the previous parak. And we say the following: V'shar shnei shavua, if it's years 1 to 6 in the Shemitah cycle, osur b'yarkos hagina umuter b'yarkos hasod. This is what we said earlier, that yerek stam means a yerek that grows in the garden vegetables, as opposed to yerokas out there in the fields. So Yerokas Hasoda not included under Yerek, which, as we said before, would be a Shem Levi. If you want to describe the Yerek of the Soda, you'd have to add the word Soda. However, B'Shvius, now on the 7th year of the cycle, which is Shemitah, and you're not allowed to plant during Shemitah, then we're going to expand the definition of Yerek. And Asur, well, I shouldn't say expand, maybe that's not a precise word. We're going to change the meaning of the word Yerek. Asur b'yarkos hasoda, muter b'yarkos hagina. This is what we call in Yiddish punk fakeret. We're going to say that he's not allowed to eat the yerokos that grow out in the fields, because those yerokos apparently don't require planting. Even without sowing these seeds, they will grow on their own. So during the Shemitah cycle, when you talk about Yerek, you mean Yerek HaSoda. Because Yerek HaBayis or Yerek HaChotzer or Yerek HaGina, these are not even accessible. They're not even available. Yerek is something that you plant and almost immediately you harvest. It grows overnight. So he doesn't find any Yerokos in the Gina that are available during Shemitah because he wasn't allowed to plant them. So therefore, if they're not accessible because you have to plant them, I'm talking about Yerek HaGina, and he's not allowed to plant them during Shemitah. Therefore, a person does not, during Shemitah, call Yerokos HaGina Yerek. They're out of his radar screen. They're off the charts. It's not in his mind because they're not available. It's like, let's say, all right, I bought the other day Japanese yams. Okay, so you can go here across the street here on Grand Street, and you can buy Japanese yams. But let's say, just theoretically, you couldn't get Japanese yams here. You'd have to go to Japan to buy them. So in that case, if I said yams, I wouldn't have in mind Japanese yams. They're not even accessible.
Right.
During Shemitah, Yerokos of a Gina are not accessible. Because how could you possibly have planted them and harvested them during Shemitah when there's an Isizriya? Those Yerokos that grow on their own without planting, like out in the Sada, those are the Yerokos that are available during Shemitah without any violation of the Isser Zriya and Shemitah. So obviously, on the Shemitah year, the same word Yerek means the exact opposite of what it meant the previous year and the previous 6 years, because in the previous 6 years, Stam Yerek means Yerek Hagina. And Yerek HaSoda has a Shem Levi, so it's not included in the word Yerek. But on Shemitah, everything is just upside down, because on Shemitah, we ask the question, what are the Yerachos that are within his his Dalet Amis, that he has access to, and we come to the conclusion it's Dafka Yerek HaSoda, which grow without Zuriya. And now we're up to a statement of Rabbi Avo in the name of Chanina ben Gamliel. And what is that? So Rabbi Avo that we're about to learn now is going to analyze this brisa about Shemitah, that during Shemitah, he prohibits himself dafka in Yerek HaSoda, not Yerek HaGina.